All right, so welcome to the Farmer Friday call. I am Jessica Gnad. I'm going to be your host today. I am joined by my colleague, Drew Menace, who's on the data and communications team for PrairieFood. How you doing, Drew?
I'm doing great this afternoon. How about yourself, Jess?
Doing pretty good. All right, let's go ahead and get to our presentation here. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can see a little bit more about our call today. All right, so this is the Farmer Friday call. We're going to do it every single Friday at noon on Zoom, and we've got 4 in a row lined out for you. Our first speaker who's already on the line today is Brandon Hunnicutt. He's coming in from Giltner, Nebraska. And then next week, we're going to have Todd Tobin, who's a good buddy of mine from the Pratt, Kansas area. He actually farms the acres that we operate in that area. And then after that, in our third week, we're going to have Dale Strickler, who is also the author of several books on regenerative agriculture. He's got a book about the drought resilient farm, and he also has a fantastic book that is textbook style. It's called Managing Pasture. And then our fourth speaker that we're going to have this week in 4 weeks is going to be Jimmy Emmons, who is a Nebraska producer down in Leedy, Oklahoma. And he does a fantastic job of talking a little bit about soil health and what you need to know. So without going through too many slides here, because that's the part that's super boring, is that today on the line, we have Brandon Hunnicutt. And I'm going to give you a little bit about his background as we get started. So Brandon is from Giltner, Nebraska. He raises corn, soybeans, seed corn, popcorn, and sorghum on his family farm. Along with his father, Daryl, and his brother, Zach, he utilizes the latest technologies while integrating conservation tillage practices and cover crops on nearly 100% of his irrigated farm. He's a graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with an ag business degree, and he spent a number of years working on postgraduate classes dealing especially in technology, plant breeding, leadership, and communication. So I'm really excited to talk to Brandon today. He is also on the National Corn Growers Association Board of Directors, Vice Chair of the Nebraska Corn Board, and Chair for the Field to Market Board of Directors. And I got to meet Brandon at Commodity Classic a few weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about Farmers for Soil Health. So Brandon, thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here today. As Jess mentioned, from Nebraska, farm with my dad and my brother. Been involved in a bunch of different things over the years, and more recently, I've probably taken a deeper dive in the sustainability space. Had the pleasure at Commodity Classic of talking about Farmers for Soil Health and that initiative through NCGA, plus some of the role between Field to Market and some other groups I'm involved with as well.
All right, so tell me, let's get a little bit specific on the operation. Tell us a little bit about your geography. What kind of soil are you working with on there? And what have you seen in your operation that is just really piquing your interest right now in terms of improving?
Yeah, so our operation, we're basically 100% irrigated. And over the years, we've slowly kept moving our whole systems approach to moving away from heavy tillage to ridge till to now we're doing a lot of strip tillage, trying to integrate cover crops when we can. When it makes a little bit of a challenge, like this year, things weren't growing very well because we've been super dry, and trying to figure out how to utilize that in some of these situations. And then over the last few years, we've been really taking a look at what are the other approaches we can take when it comes to increasing our biology within our soil, increasing our soil organic matter. Led us through trying different biologicals, including PrairieFood. And over the last year, we had also tried some interseeding cover crops within our corn through the University of Nebraska and the Nature Conservancy, some trials there. And we found out that some of our soil health was coming back a whole lot higher than the other participants, and we necessarily couldn't figure out why until we looked at, in this case it was specifically PrairieFood, but just looking at what we were doing to increase that soil microbial activity and how does that relate to our water holding capacity and hopefully at some point increasing yields on the farm as well.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of key points there. And I just want to mention, put your questions for Brandon in the chat. And yes, I want to give a shout out, Alan. Thanks for reminding me. Nice to see you again. K-State women's basketball playing the NIT versus Washington, so we have to cheer them on. I took a little dive at Drew before the call got started because I live in Manhattan, Kansas, and he's in Lawrence. So I was just checking up on the KU Jayhawks, but it doesn't appear as if they're still in the tournament and that the Wildcats are. So, okay. So Brandon, let's break down a little bit. When you talk about, I'm looking at soil health on my farm, what specifically are you looking at? Maybe grab one or two things and let's deep dive into them.
Sure. So, originally when we were looking at soil health, and I'll back it up to about, 15, 16 years ago, on our seed corn production, we've been talking to some of the guys from USDA, ARS, and they were trying to figure out how do we, in certain parts of Nebraska, there's really high nitrates in the groundwater, and trying to figure out how is it we can maybe lower those. And in this specific case, we were coming back in, planting wheat, interseeding soybeans into that in a relay system, and then really trying to figure out how is it that process will work. And we saw some soil health benefits that we didn't know maybe were possible, but we weren't measuring them. We were just going off just kind of how the soil looked, how the soil felt, what we saw really moving along there. Fast forward, and we've been trying to figure out what is the next stage, because like where I'm at in Nebraska, I'll take one nutrient in the soil. So when we talk about potash, we have really high potash levels in our soil, but they're not available. And that's been a fascinating problem we've had over time is, okay, how is it, we can't fix it by putting potash on the soil because it's overly expensive for what we have in the soils and nobody recommends it. So what is it we can do to release that maybe this is a potash, or what is it we can do to release the phos in the soil? And so we've started looking at what is it we're doing to the soils? What are the products that we're adding that'll increase the soil microbial activity to a point that we're seeing those benefits within the soil, trying to figure out how that works to release it to help with crop nutrient needs. And so that's been one of the avenues we've looked at, trying to figure that out.
So you mentioned a little bit about soil microbial activity. Is that pretty standard lingo in your world? Are most producers are they going out and scouting their field? They're like, man, I wonder what my soil microbial activity is right now. And what are your thoughts on that? What's your vision?
I think there's starting to be more farmers really looking at soil microbial activity, but it's still a really small number. I mean, it's a very eclectic bunch. We've done some organic production. So yeah, so we've got the organic guys that are looking at, what is the approach I can take to minimize synthetics. And then we've got this other group that is really starting to take this dive into what is it that's going on under the soil and how can I make that better. And it's not common language. We're not really looking at it from a farmer standpoint of, we'll talk NPK, we'll talk crop protection products, we'll talk hybrids, we'll talk that all day long. But when you come down to soil microbial activity, it's not normal nomenclature of farmers around us, but they're starting to see a few more discuss it, but it still seems like it's a really small group.
Well, I was trying to pull up a quote real quick and I couldn't find it, so I'm going to wing it here. I read a quote recently, I believe it was on an NRCS website, and to paraphrase it, it said that we know way more about the sun and the moon and the stars and the galaxies that we've never been to planets that we've never been to concepts that we can't ever explain. We know more about that than we do the soil beneath our feet. And I'm going to take a stab and say it's Isaac Newton is who said that, but maybe somebody can fact check me along the way. But I think that's pretty impactful to say, is that in agriculture, there does seem to be a very a swift shift back down into the biology of the soil. And I, for one, you called, it says an eclectic group. I think that's accurate. And I think we have a few of these eclectic folk on this call right now. So when you think about production agriculture, and now all of a sudden we're talking about biology, I mean, is that a buzzword that people are like, man, I really need to get back to the basics and learn a little bit more about soil biology?
I think we're starting to see a little bit of that, but I still do think a lot of it comes down to farmers are still trying to look for a magic bullet, whether it's to reduce nitrogen needs or to, increase yield, whatever the concept is they're looking at. And slowly but surely starting to take a look at what's going on in the soil, especially, and I'll take it from a Nebraska approach, and specifically in the NRD that I live in, is we have really high nitrates in areas with groundwater, as I mentioned before, and trying to figure out, okay, what is going on there? How is it we can mitigate that risk? We're maybe not going to fix a problem, but what is it we can do to mitigate that? And what are we missing within the soil itself? Especially when we start looking at, what goes on when we add a cover crop, or why are my soil organic matters maybe staying stagnant or going backwards? What else can be done to do that? And we still aren't quite there to saying, okay, let's take a step back and look at the biology of the soil. Let's look at what's going on there and really take a dive into it, because it's not easy. I mean, I will admit that it's not as easy as saying, okay, if I add X amount of nitrogen to this crop, I should produce yield of Y. And we don't think of it in the same terms. And so it's not easy for most guys to want to dive into.
So I want to talk about that. So you talk about the goal is you're looking at your crop and we're going to put in X amount of nitrogen and we're going to get X yield. Does that always happen?
No, it doesn't. We know it to a point. But we'll take that. We know it to a point if growing conditions are ideal. But you take 2022, we're in a drought, whether you're Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado. We understand Texas. We understand that we were in this significant drought, maybe not in 2012 terms, but enough. And we looked at some of the yields were okay. They weren't great. We had carryover nitrogen levels that were pretty high, even for those of us who were really minimizing our nitrogen loads. So that it doesn't always equal out the way we think it should.
Yeah, and I should have kind of added a little bit more clarity to my question. So we know that the outcome is yield, and we want it. That's the yield equals the dollars. That's what we take to the bank. That's what we continue on with. But in your journey of adopting more soil health practices, do you think about success differently?
We do think about it differently. It's not just a matter of can we reduce nitrogen, but it's if we're increasing the capabilities of the soil, are we having to use less irrigation, which irrigation is a huge expense. So if the soil's healthier, if the organic matter is higher, do we have better water holding capacity? So whether it's through irrigation or through a significant rainfall event or a lack of rainfall, how is the soil responding in that fashion? Also, what is it doing? How is the crop responding? Because sometimes it's not always, what we've learned, especially when we're growing popcorn, it's not always about yield. I mean, yield does pay the bills, but if that crop is healthier, it stands, because especially in popcorn, it will fall over if I blow on it wrong. But if we can make that plant healthier and stronger, then it'll withstand some of the natural tendencies of what popcorn has. And we saw that last year. We're not exactly sure why. I don't have a way to replicate it, but those are some of the things that we've been thinking about on. They ultimately equate to yield, but in a different fashion.
So speaking of popcorn, are you selling that into a specialty market? And if so, talk a little bit about the value add.
So our popcorn, when we grow popcorn, it goes to a company here in Nebraska called Preferred Popcorn. If you go to AMC theaters, if you're in the Chicago area and you're at Garrett's Popcorn or Nuts on Clark, that's where they sell their popcorn there, into some other, and throughout the world. And so it is a specialty market, you know, with you know, a good premium to it. And we had sort of personally, but through preferred, done a contract, and it happened to be produced a popcorn that had no synthetic fertilizers, and it had a biological put on it. And what's interesting, and I need to figure this out because I've got some theories on it, that we've increased the nutritional value of the popcorn by what we were doing, but we ultimately, people have said it's the best popcorn they've ever had. And I'm like, it's literally the same variety that I'm growing for other purposes. So I'm trying to figure out, that'd be one goal, is if we're doing these regenerative practices, to use that term, are we increasing a nutritional value, a taste value within popcorn? That's hard to make. I don't know how to measure it yet.
So some of you can read my mind, including Deanna. So Brandon, I don't know if you know my friend Deanna, but Deanna Lozensky is up in North Dakota, and she runs a company called Guardian Grains. And so I'm just gonna, like, Deanna, can I call on you? Can I put you on the spot here? Because your company, you guys do a lot with nutrient density. And if I'm correct, what you're doing to increase nutrient density is through agronomic practices and principles of soil health. So, you know, not to put you on the spot, but that's exactly what I'm doing right now.
No. Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, we're finding a link between the way we grow our grain and the nutrient value, right? And so we're testing that and having specific nutritional tests done to find out the exact differences. And it makes a difference, right? So growing with no synthetic inputs, no seed treatments, no insecticide, no fungicide, it makes a difference in the nutritional value is what we're finding. And the flavor, right? Which is what Brandon is talking about. The flavor has a huge, there's a huge benefit. And part of that is some people are describing it as a terroir, right? Like in wine. But if your place can have a taste, right?
Oh, wow.
And that's pretty cool to be able to do that. And I think the best way to tap into that is without all the extras and without all the synthetics. And I think you're on the right track as far as flavor and nutritional profile.
So if your place can have a taste, so you're at the movie theater and you're like, I really think this is, you know, South Central Nebraska. This tastes like South Central Nebraska, you know, or the middle of Kansas. Well, thank you so much for that, Deanna. And we'll probably pull you back up here in just a moment here. Let's see, remove pin. So Brandon, any thoughts about, I'm just going to ask you to predict the future with nutrient density. And I'm going to weave this conversation a little bit towards climate smart commodities. And we'll start to introduce that topic. But do you think that there's a future in agriculture where there is a greater value placed on nutrient dense in commodity production?
You know, I think there is, because I think one of the challenges we've seen in production agriculture is we're trying to figure out what the consumer wants. And a little bit, are we trying to drive what the consumer wants, or is the consumer driving what we need to produce? And, you know, we talk about organics, you know, non-GMOs, any of those other commodities out there. But I think when it comes down to nutrient density, you're starting to see, it seems like more people concerned about what is it my food is doing for me? What is it what I'm putting in my mouth, and what's going, how is it feeding my body? I think there will be a play there in some fashion in the future. It's just a matter of how do we market it? How do we take it to scale? You know, if we were looking at it from production agriculture standpoint, how do we get to the scale of large scale agriculture? But I really think it's going to go back to not so much a specialty market, but you're going to be find the farmers who are really able to tap into that as a premium market that they're willing to sell into. we see it in some beef already, some guys
Yeah.
around us that are selling a very specific, they're feeding their cows something very specific, increasing the nutritional value and doing really well at it. You need to take that to the crops that we're growing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you pointed out there is at scale. And also, I just want to point out you're a good sport because I didn't give you a list of questions. I mean, I just like texted him a couple of weeks ago and I said, hey, we're going to do this conversation on Zoom. And the response was like, yeah, sure, great, I'll do it. So that's the whole point of Farmer Friday. And I want to let everybody know, put your questions in the chat, ask questions. We'll definitely take them here in a bit. We'll open up cameras and you can actually ask questions directly to myself or other people that are on the call. But the question about scale, that's one reason why next week I'm bringing on Todd Tobin. So I feel like he has taken an operation of around 7,000 acres and he's doing this at scale now. And it took time. Everything that we're talking about takes time, but the point of putting out some of this education is to speed up the time that it would take other producers to do it. So to learn from your peers and continue to do that. So a couple things that I'm going to go backwards here and then I'll keep going on to the commodity side of it. You talked about relay cropping. How popular is relay cropping in your area? And could you break down a little bit of how you do the relay cropping in terms of, when are you planting? Give a little bit of the logistics of relay cropping. And then my question is, are you pulling, are both of those your cash crop or is one more of a cover or how do you look at that?
So from when we were doing the relay intercropping, we did it for a few years. And so did the guys around us. One of the more interesting things that happened was the sandier soils they tried it in. The USDA guys like, I think it's gonna take us 4 or 5 years to fix this, and it took like a year. He's like, well, that happened quicker than I thought. But at the same time, we stepped away from it. A little bit of it is when we're trying to grow, like in our case, we're trying to grow wheat in South Central Nebraska because we're doing wheat and then soybeans, running them both as a cash crop. If we don't, we've hit this climatic situation where we're not getting as much snow as we used to, so we don't get the cover. Because we don't get the cover, we get winter kill, and so our wheat is not worth even trying to harvest. So, but we've taken that same approach in some aspects into some of the cover cropping we've done, where it's been, letting the rye grow. We did this one year on seed corn. We let it grow pretty tall, strip tilled it, planted right into it, then killed it. And so the rye was a non-cash crop, but we had really good results. And there's another seed grower I talked to a couple hours away from me, had the exact same results as past year. So we have some of our challenges with that. We'd run into the rules and regs from the USDA, from when we're trying to participate in programs. What is which ones can be insured? Can you insure both of them or not? So there's been these other hindrances that in a perfect world, we could find a way around it, but I don't write the rules at the USDA, so I can't fix that.
Well, we know a few people that are working on some of that. That's been a hot topic. We've actually talked about rules and regulation and barriers to adoption on the Farmer Friday in the past when we used to do it, including we heard from Gail Fuller, who has taken that battle to DC several times to be able to hopefully change the way that things look so that producers can still have their coverage and they can still take a risk on the way that they're producing, but it also doesn't limit their ability to innovate as they go along. So another question that I had in listening to you talk is thinking about the total operation. What percentage of the total are you trying something new on frequently? And how do you think about new things, whether it's products, equipment, techniques, practices? Do you have like a philosophy that guides your decisions?
The philosophy that guides my decisions. Sometimes it's, what did I see at Commodity Classic, which is strangely has happened more than once of, hey, that's cool, let's try that. I'm going to say probably it's in some fashion, at least half our acres every year, at least we're trying something different. And maybe something like, hey, we're going to try this product on half the acres, or we're going to try this technology. You know, one point is our soil moisture sensors. We keep trying to figure out which ones we want, so we keep trying new ones. Not every year, but every few years we'll try a new one out there, and then we might increase the usage on there. But usually what I'm thinking about is, does it fit into our operation? What do I want to gain from trying this product? Is it just whatever that is, if it's technology, if it's biologicals, whatever the case might be? Is there something I just want to learn? Is something I want to try? Is there some question I'm trying to answer? So when we did the interseeding of the cover crop through UNL, that was more, okay, can it be done? And how will we do it? Because we don't have the equipment for it. They had it for a small scale. But what the interesting thing that happens is, on that one, we didn't know, you know, we had a yield hit the first year, and we figured out why. The second year, first and second year, the cover crops looked like absolute garbage. You know, if I was looking at it, like, I was not going to take anybody out there and show this off. And then I found out after year 3, the total benefit we got, and it changed my thinking of it. But that's kind of where I've looked at this, is what is it I can do? And then what is it going to change? And is it a benefit to the farm? Is there another benefit out there? Does it have a long-term, maybe it's an educational standpoint of trying to talk to other farmers or regulators or politicians about, hey, we're trying this, and this is what we need to make this, to adapt this on large scale.
Yeah, you know, the mindset shift in all of this is pretty big. And you know, we talked about this earlier about speaking the same language. I like what I heard you say about sometimes it's a 3-year take, sometimes change takes time. And what we hear a lot in the regenerative agriculture space is farming in terms of your entire ecosystem, instead of just single field, single season, single crop, of just like looking at it as a whole. And more of a systems approach to making changes, because one little change here could have an exponential change somewhere else, and we don't have all those answers. So I really appreciate that you're patient and you kind of take the time to bring on new things. And that's how we met you, through PrairieFood, is being able to trial some of the work that we do. So thank you so much for that. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I believe if anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. I didn't introduce him earlier because he's on the road, but Mark Hines is our CCA agronomist. He's on the call here, so if you have any questions for him. So Brandon, I heard you on a panel for the Climate Smart Commodities at Commodity Classic in Orlando, and specifically you were talking about the program Farmers for Soil Health. And Drew, if you have that link, maybe go ahead and stick that up there. But a little bit of background is that with, you know, over the last year, probably longer, the USDA allocated funding that was to help the United States agriculture develop climate smart commodities. And there's not a strict definition on what is a climate smart commodity. The goal of this funding was for groups to form partnerships and to develop pilot programs so that the crops that we have grown through the commodity lens in the United States have a better effect on the climate, whether it's the reduction of greenhouse gas, you know, pulling that carbon from the atmosphere, pumping it back into the soil, which is my absolute favorite topic on the planet. And no group or organization can do that. That's done by plants. You know, plants do that. So Brandon, tell us a little bit more about that panel discussion at Commodity Classic and your involvement with Farmers for Soil Health.
Yeah, so glad you brought that up. So Farmers for Soil Health, as you mentioned, was one of the Climate Smart Commodity Grant awardees. And as you see in the link, it was through NIFWIF. They're the fiduciary responsibility of it, but it's with the National Corn Growers Association, Soybean Association, and pork producers, and trying to get cover crops out on as many acres as possible. And they're not the only ones doing it. If you look at, and I'll use, because since I'm in Nebraska, I looked up Nebraska. I think there's 11 different CSC programs in Nebraska alone. and they're all over the board, ranging from everything from, hey, how do we get more cover crops seeded, and what's the benefit of those, to how do we measure carbon in the soil, and is there a way to do that through technology? And so that was really introducing it, sitting on the panel, having the Secretary of Ag come out and sign the MOU with corn, or with Farmers for Soil Health, as one of the first two fully funded between grant awardees, between Farmers for Soil Health and the Iowa Soybean Association program as well. And so we've been very grateful that the USDA decided that, hey, we need to do something about this, because we need to find wide scale adoption for these practices, and we need to alleviate some of the risk that farmers are taking to try these new practices. Because I think there's a lot of farmers that want to try it, but they don't have the knowledge base to do it. They don't have the technical expertise. They don't have the equipment. And how is it we, as organizations, and come alongside the federal government and really push this conversation and really try to find out what works where, because we know that not everything works in all areas. And so laying that out there and hopefully getting some farmers to sign up, it's going to be a heavy lift, trying to get this accomplished.
So I think it said 20 different states are participating in this. Is it something where there'll be an open enrollment down the road, or has that already been established?
They're still really trying to put the final touches on that. Again, from a Nebraska corn standpoint, they're partnering with PCM out of Illinois to help run some of this programming, just because we don't have, Nebraska corn does not have the staff to be able to oversee it. So who else can we work with? And I think they'll start doing the sign up, but hopefully we can get something in the ground, on the cover crop aspect the fall of this year. Little concerned we're going to be on a lot of these programs another 15 months out before we can really get something going, just because it's already almost April and guys aren't, now we're in planning mode.
Are you, it could also possibly be that maybe the government's a little slow.
Government's a little slow, and I think they didn't realize what was entailed, because I'm involved with another project as well, and their response was, this is the most complex grant we have seen.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to figure out, it's going to get signed, it's just a matter of they said, yeah, this is not what we expected.
It's complicated, but if you look at the history, I'm going to go deep here because I'm a soil nerd and this stuff just really excites me. I mean, if you look at the history of civilization, the history of agriculture, I have great hope that by implementing different projects like this one and having companies like PrairieFood that are getting lifted in the middle of the United States to take a look at the soil, I hope that's a significant shift in the way that humans can continue to live on this planet. When I first started doing this kind of work, it was an eclectic group. It was, you'd hear a rumor about some guy a couple counties over that was growing his own fertilizer, or measuring his soil organic matter or something like that. And it was just always kind of off to the side. And now these conversations are getting so big. I had never attended Commodity Classic, but if you had told me that it wasn't a soil health focused event, I wouldn't have believed you, because I saw so much focus on soil health at Commodity Classic. I thought, hey, this is fantastic. We are lighting it up right now.
And that's a great point, because there really hasn't, there's always been a little bit of that, and from the soil health standpoint, but there's more and more of it. And we're trying to figure out how to, and trying to figure out how to incorporate other avenues into Commodity Classic to make sure that, hey, as we're looking at this from a farmer standpoint, how is it we can get the end users involved? So there was what do we call this? A sustainable supply chain forum that was held off-site, that was hosted by Field to Market. But it's like, hey, we need to bring those end users, and those end users being the PepsiCos of the world, the Nestle Purinas of the world, those that are going to have a more direct consumer contact than we are, bring them into the fold. How can we utilize their dollars as well to incentivize farmers to be able to try some of these practices and then just move everything forward. So it's been really exciting to see.
Well, okay, so I did have a schedule conflict with Commodity Classic because there's also Expo East that was going on, which is a huge food trade show. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, we need half of Expo East or Expo West and half a Commodity Classic talking, because those are the food companies, those are the NGOs. Some of them are the Pepsis and the big companies, but that's where this conversation needs to head, in my opinion. And I'll ask some of the producers that are on this call, give me your thoughts. Do we need PepsiCo? Do we need Nestle? Or should we be looking a little bit more locally about how we're providing nutrients to the state of Kansas or the state of Nebraska? So I'm just trying to kind of get a little bit of conversation going. But I do think that that's something that's very important. Farmers need to be at the forefront of these conversations. We are the producers. And so we need to come alongside some of the decision makers in these companies that are trying to do good. They're trying to offset their own imprint in the carbon space or whatever it might be. But I mean, farmers need to be at the forefront of those conversations. And that's why we're doing this Farmer Friday. Like I mentioned, we've got several producers that are coming up down the road in the next couple weeks. And one thing that, if it's okay to transition over, so if you guys want to, if you're here still on the line with us, we are going to take some audience questions. I'd like to encourage you to turn on your camera. And if you would like to, just raise your hand and ask a question. I have a few here already that I'm going to ask. Oh, there's everybody's faces. I see them all popping on here. So Brandon, you talked a little bit about improving soil health. How are you measuring that? What is your SOM in Nebraska on your fields? Because in Kansas, where I'm at, it varies greatly according to where you're at in the state. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Right where I'm at, like our SOM is probably, I would say if we're in that 2.6 to 3.2 range, we probably capture the vast majority of right around my area. You go 20 minutes north of us, we get into some sand. But that's probably, that would be a lot of it. There's been some challenges because we're heavy seed corn production in our area. You name a seed corn company and they probably have a production facility within 30 minutes of us. So that's been a challenge of a seed corn soybean rotation, driving SOM backwards. And so that's, we're trying to figure out how do we increase our SOM? Are we measuring the right thing? Usually we're just doing your standardized soil tests. And this last couple of years, we've started taking more of the Haney soil tests and trying to figure that out. How does that look? And some of those have led to some very interesting discoveries for us of what happens if you increase your soil microbial activity to a certain level. What happens to the soil and what can we do to make sure we have a living root out there at all times. Just some of those things that we're still trying to figure out, and how is it we can incorporate those on the farm. Partly because we're still not measuring everything we need to. Hopefully this year we'll get some more answers. We changed planters, so we got some more data gathering equipment on there as well, that hopefully we can get a better feel of what's actually going on out there, especially at planting time.
Yeah, so I think that's a really great point. I always tell people I'm a social scientist, not a soil scientist. And so I ask questions like this because I genuinely am interested in it and I don't know. And years ago, many years ago, somebody said, well, you can't change those things. A lot of those things you can't change. But I think we're finding through different testing that we can change that. And just to pause anybody that is out there, the social scientist in me, the way that I understand it is the organic matter is what's alive in your soil. And so the more activity you have, the higher soil organic matter you're going to have. And that equates to nutrient cycling. That equates to when you have the living roots in the ground, it's pulling the carbon from the atmosphere. But probably one of the most impressive parts about what I've learned is that for every 1 point increase of SOM that you have, you can hold an additional 25,000 gallons of water per acre. And where I live in Kansas, in southwestern Kansas, where the PrairieFood facility is in Pratt, that's a 1 inch rain. That your soil has a sponge-like structure, and it can hold that soil. And so I noticed my good buddy Jimmy Emmons is on the line, and I'm going to call him out because that's the fun part about Farmer Friday is you don't know. I'm looking at it, it's like the game show squares, and I'm like, hey, who are my buddies that are on this call that I can pull in? And so Jimmy, I know that in your operation, you guys, I don't think you're not quite as dry as we are in Kansas. But what have you seen for improving SOM?
So Jessica, 13 years ago, we started at less than 0.5%. A lot of our sandy soils were in that 0.3, 0.4 range, which was just horrible. To now, most of that sandy soil's in that 1%. We have a lot of 2s and some 3s. 2.5 is probably a lot of the average. Now, when we get dry and everything shuts down, before the biology shuts completely off, they'll consume some of that carbon and actually back up a little ways. And so that's part of being the drought before the system shuts down. And we are in a D3. We should be in a D4, but that's another argument for another day. But that's just part of the challenges of agriculture is, when we are wet, we need to grow all we can grow and build that back. But we are going to be in them dry times. So we can go further in a drought just because we've increased our soil organic matter. But once you exhaust that out, then it's exhausted out. But the great thing is that our infiltration rates are 8 to 10 inches an hour. So when we do get these big rains at the end of the drought, whenever that is, we'll be able to take it all in.
You'll be able to capture every part of that region.
Catch it where it falls is our goal.
All right. Well, a little bit of feedback there, Jimmy. There you go. So that was just a little bit of a teaser. Jimmy's going to be joining us on the April 14th Farmer Friday call. He's also the recent vice president for a new organization, and the name of the organization slips my memory at this time. But also Jimmy Emmons has used PrairieFood. Brandon has used PrairieFood. That's the company that I represent, and PrairieFood is a microcarbon that is able to, you put it on the soil, and we're able to help stimulate that biology that we're talking about, kind of the whole core of this conversation here. So I know we have a couple folks on the line from PrairieFood. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. And I saw a hand up earlier. Where did I see that hand? Somebody had a question. Anybody else on the call? I love to see the international folks joining us, and I'm going to ask Frank what time it is in Australia. You're muted, Frank.
All right. Yep. Well, I had to get up at 3:30 a.m. so I could have a cup of coffee before I logged on. I'm pretty dedicated, Jess.
Thank you so much. Frank has been joining us on Farmer Fridays for several years now, and it's been great getting caught up with him. So with that, if anybody has any other questions, Brandon, do you have anything else that you would like to kind of add to the conversation? Or maybe since you are so involved in agriculture, what does it mean to see a new company like PrairieFood come on the scene that is committed to making this easier for producers to adopt some of these practices? So maybe just kind of an overview for your point of view.
From my point of view, it's great to see a company that's coming online that really has, the best interest of the farmer, the best interest of the soil, of the planet at heart. Sometimes we get all jaded in the ag community because you learn which companies are out there just to make a quick buck. and whether or not the product works. And so it's been really refreshing to say, okay, I can work with this product. We can see where it's going. We can see the benefits we're getting and the challenges that we may face. And whether it's utilizing the product or utilizing something else within the process. So it's been great to work with them.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Well, folks, we are getting to the end of our call here. Do we have any more questions? Anybody, feel free just to interject here, unmute yourself and ask away. And we have more people joining us even. Thank you.
Just on the livestock side, I know it's,
I suppose anybody's out there looking at this thing.
Go ahead about the livestock.
Yeah. Okay. So down here, the growing interest in sort of regenerative agriculture is being driven a lot by the consumers, and it's and so even one of our biggest supermarket chains is now partnering with livestock producers to produce branded lines of meat products, which guarantee, the way the animals are treated, the way the stock are grown, and they've recognised that this is a growing segment within their business. But a lot of it with farmers. With small farmers, which I find through the radio program, is that they're not going to be able to feed the world. They can't. They got to scale their production to the market they're in, and I think that's one of the big lessons for farmers to learn. I can't compete with a farm that's got 10,000 or more breeder ewes in the sheep industry. And so, you've really got to have a look at where your market is. And
that. I know what.
Well, Frank, I think that's really impactful. What you say is just being able to scale in the market that you're in. And that was one reason why I have a lot of hope that the climate smart commodity.
Oh, here's a picture of our, what do you call it?
Gives us the ability to be able to do that. And, we will be talking about livestock here on the call here in a couple of weeks. We've got Dale Strickler, who has done a lot with managing livestock. And when you look at the principles of regenerative agriculture, there are many principles out there of which you can take
out of the window
practices and use them. And one of them is the integration of livestock. And so from what I have heard from what producers and farmers and ranchers have said to me is that when you get the livestock back onto the cropping grounds, you see that soil health go up really fast, really high. So Drew, you have a question here. Finish this question. Oh, Judy, I will go ahead and unmute you. And if you have a question, feel free to go ahead.
Tomorrow, and I'm going to be there tomorrow night and staying overnight, 2 nights in a hotel in New York, and we're going to be on a show. So
we haven't been on an airplane in quite a while.
And Bruce and I
got our lunches.
Yeah, we just love her. I guess I do. But Bruce and I love the Mike Huckabee show, and Bruce has said so many times, I want to be on it. We just
hey, hon, I got something to show. I just wrote that, but I can't read my writing. Right? What's that?
Okay. So, is there, I think I couldn't hear them very good as far as the question. I didn't know if they were on another line. So any other questions for the Farmer Friday? And if so, we might continue to wrap things up. Deanna?
Okay, all right, let's see, what can I say?
Judy, did you have a question for the farmers?
Oh, hi, guys. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I mean,
that's a start.
Yeah. Hi, guys. This is just so exciting that I can't think of anything else.
I know it. Hi, guys. How are you? How's that?
We're doing pretty good.
Well,
we're here for you.
Oh, well, I'll print what you said. How?
Okay. That was fantastic. Any other questions on the line here? All right, well, I'm going to stop the recording and we can relax if anybody has any other questions that they'd like